By the time Mrs. Hart discovered that her name had vanished from the parish coal list, nearly everyone else had already left St. Anselm's. Cecily Fairbourne remained because she had learned long ago that the smallest mistakes were usually found after the important people had gone home. She stood near the vestry table with a pencil in one hand and the relief ledger open before her. The church still smelled faintly of beeswax and damp wool. Beyond the half-open door, voices faded along the gravel path as families returned to their carriages. "Mrs. Hart received coal last winter," Cecily said. Mrs. Pembroke, the rector's wife, leaned over the page. "She did. 4 deliveries, if I remember correctly." 5. Cecily turned back 3 leaves. The January delivery was entered after the account was balanced. Her name should have carried forward. A gentleman standing near the vestry window glanced toward them. Cecily had noticed him during the service, though she had taken care not to stare. Everyone in Belmere knew that Sebastian Vale, Duke of Alderwick, had returned to his Hampshire estate after several months away. A duke did not need an introduction in a village church. His arrival announced itself in bowed heads, lowered voices, and the rector's careful attention. Cecily lowered her own. Mrs. Hart stood anxiously beside the table, clutching the worn handle of her reticule. "It does not matter, Miss Fairbourne," the widow said. "There are others in greater need. It matters if the omission is ours rather than yours." Cecily traced the columns again. The error was simple. A figure had been copied into the wrong line when the summer ledger was opened. She corrected it. Mrs. Pembroke released a breath. "There. Thank heaven you noticed." Mrs. Hart's shoulders softened. Cecily smiled at her. "The first delivery should reach you before the end of the month. If there is any further difficulty, send word to me." "You are very kind." "No, only attentive." A man's voice came from the window. Attention is often rarer. Cecily looked up. The Duke of Alderwick had crossed the vestry without her hearing him. He was taller than she had realized, from across the nave, dressed with the quiet precision of a man whose coat required no ornament to declare its expense. His expression held the suggestion of amusement, though not enough to make Cecily certain whether it was meant for her or for the world in general. Mrs. Pembroke brightened at once. "Your Grace, we were only correcting a small parish oversight." "So I gathered." His eyes moved to the ledger, then to Cecily. Cecily had spent much of her life watching people look past her while speaking directly over her. Sebastian Vale did neither. "Mrs. Pembroke," he said, "who is this formidable guardian of coal accounts?" There was humor in the question, but not mockery. Mrs. Pembroke smiled. "Miss Cecily Fairbourne. She lives with her aunt at Fairbourne House." "Mrs. Fairbourne's niece?" "Yes." The Duke inclined his head. "Miss Fairbourne." "Your Grace." Mrs. Hart began thanking Mrs. Pembroke again. Cecily quietly closed the ledger and stepped aside, allowing the rector's wife to receive the gratitude that naturally belonged to her position. But when Cecily glanced back, the Duke was still watching her. Not boldly, not improperly, simply as though he had noticed who had actually repaired the mistake. That, for reasons Cecily did not care to examine too closely, followed her home. Fairbourne House stood less than a mile beyond Belmere, respectable enough to satisfy visitors and modest enough to remind Cecily that respectability could be a narrow room. By Sunday afternoon, the church clothes had been put away, the luncheon things cleared, and Agnes Fairbourne had settled beside the drawing-room fire with the expression of a woman preparing to correct the defects of the world. Cecily sat at the escritoire. Her mother's tortoise-shell spectacles case rested beside the parish accounts. She opened it carefully. The hinges were slightly worn, and one corner had been polished almost smooth by years of use. The spectacles inside had belonged to her mother, who had taught Cecily to read account books with the same seriousness other mothers gave to embroidery. Numbers, her mother had once said, were patient things. They did not become offended when a woman understood them. Cecily placed the spectacles on her nose and returned to the relief figures. You should not have interfered this morning. She did not look up. Mrs. Hart had been omitted. Mrs. Pembroke could have corrected it. She was occupied. She is the rector's wife. Being occupied is part of her importance. Cecily made a small notation. Agnes's knitting needles clicked. You have a tiresome habit of making yourself useful where no one has asked you to be. Mrs. Hart seemed glad enough. Poor people are always glad when someone fusses over them. Cecily removed her spectacles. That does not make the coal less warm. Agnes's mouth tightened. At 57, Agnes Fairbourne was still handsome in the austere manner of portraits painted to discourage intimacy. Widowhood had not softened her. If anything, it had given moral dignity to habits that had once been called merely severe. I sometimes wonder, Agnes said, whether you understand how you appear. Cecily knew this path. She had walked it too many times. A carriage sounded faintly on the road outside. Cecily's gaze shifted toward the window before she could stop herself. Only for a moment. Agnes saw. Of course she saw. The knitting needles went still. Nobody is coming for you, Cecily. The words had been spoken before. On Sundays, most often. Sunday was. The day, Agnes seemed to find them particularly suitable, as if returning from church gave cruelty a cleaner collar. Cecily folded her spectacles and placed them carefully back into their case. Then she closed it. No, she said quietly. Perhaps not. Agnes relaxed, mistaking calm for surrender. Cecily turned in her chair. But I would rather be alone than welcomed, only because someone believed I had no choice. For several seconds, the room was silent. Agnes's face changed almost imperceptibly. You are 31 years old. I am aware. You have no establishment of your own. I am aware of that as well. And still you speak as if pride were a form of independence. Cecily looked at her. No, only self-respect. She returned to the parish accounts. Agnes resumed her knitting with sharper movements. Neither woman heard the carriage that passed Fairbourne House less than an hour later on its way to Alderwick Park. At the ducal estate, Sebastian Vale stood in his steward's office with Mrs. Hart's relief entry open before him. The mistake was exactly where Miss Fairbourne had said it was. He read the corrected line twice. Then he looked at his steward. See that the Hart cottage receives its coal without delay. Of course, Your Grace. And the drainage ditch behind the south cottages? I'll have it inspected tomorrow. Sebastian closed the ledger. His steward hesitated. Was there anything else, Your Grace? Sebastian thought of a woman in a quiet grey church dress who had repaired another person's misfortune and then stepped aside before anyone could praise her. Yes. He reached for his gloves. Have the carriage brought round in the morning. The steward waited. Sebastian's mouth curved faintly. Fairbourne House. The Alderwick carriage arrived shortly before 11 the next morning. Cecily heard it from the morning room. Not because she had been waiting for it. She told herself that twice before the knock sounded at the front door. Agnes looked up from the letter she had been reading. Were you expecting someone? No. The knocker sounded again, firm enough to travel through the quiet house. A moment later, Martha Bell appeared in the doorway. His Grace, the Duke of Alderwick, ma'am. Agnes rose so quickly that the letter slipped from her lap. The Duke? Yes, ma'am. Cecily stood more slowly. For one bewildering instant, she thought of the vestry, the relief ledger, and the way Sebastian Vale had looked at her after she corrected Mrs. Hart's name. Then she dismissed the thought as vanity. A duke did not call upon an unmarried gentlewoman because she had noticed a line in an account book. Agnes smoothed the front of her dark morning gown. Show his Grace into the drawing room. Martha hesitated. Agnes noticed. What is it? His Grace asked for Miss Fairbourne. The room became very still. Cecily did not move. Agnes gave a small laugh that sounded entirely unlike amusement. You must have misunderstood. I don't believe so, ma'am. Then his grace has mistaken the household. He means me. Martha looked toward Cecily and then quickly away. He gave me his card, ma'am. Agnes held out her hand. Before Martha could place it there, a man's voice sounded from the hall. There has been no mistake, Mrs. Fairbourne. Sebastian Vale stood just beyond the open morning room door. He had removed his hat, but still wore his gloves, and the morning light from the hall window edged his dark coat with silver. His expression was grave enough for propriety, and amused enough to suggest he had heard more than Agnes would have preferred. Agnes recovered first. Your Grace, forgive us. We were not prepared for so distinguished a visitor. I find preparation overrated. His gaze moved to Cecily. Good morning, Miss Fairbourne, she curtsied. Your Grace, I hope I have not called at an inconvenient hour. Agnes answered immediately. Not at all. Sebastian's eyes remained on Cecily. I was asking Miss Fairbourne. Agnes's mouth tightened. Cecily felt something dangerously close to laughter rise in her throat. She suppressed it. No, Your Grace, it is not inconvenient. Excellent. He glanced at the card still in Martha's hand. I have come to call upon Miss Fairbourne. The words were spoken plainly. No dramatic emphasis. No hesitation. Yet Cecily had the strange sensation that something in the room had shifted its weight. Agnes gestured toward the drawing room. Of course. We should sit. Sebastian followed them in. Agnes took the central chair near the fire. Cecily chose one opposite her, leaving Sebastian the place between them. Tea was ordered. For several minutes, Agnes attempted to turn the conversation toward parish committees, Alderwick Park, and the weather's likely effect on Michaelmas rents. Sebastian answered politely. Then he turned to Cecily. Mrs. Hart's coal has been restored to the list. Her attention sharpened. I am glad. And my steward inspected the drainage behind the south cottages this morning. 2 of the channels are badly cut. Cecily frowned. That would explain why the lower garden floods after only moderate rain. So I was told. Agnes gave a faint smile. Cecily has always been overly interested in other people's difficulties. Sebastian looked at her. Has she? She means well, of course, but one cannot take responsibility for every widow in Hampshire. No, Sebastian said, only for the ones whose names one removes from the coal list. Agnes blinked. Cecily lowered her eyes to hide the sudden warmth behind them. He had not raised his voice. He had not defended her sentimentally. He had simply placed the error where it belonged. Sebastian turned back to her. How did you notice the omission? Cecily answered. The totals did not reconcile. Agnes spoke over her. She has a fondness for household figures. Sebastian waited until Agnes finished. Then he asked Cecily, and? Cecily looked at him. The January delivery had been entered late in the old ledger. When the new list was copied, Mrs. Hart's name was missed. The total was too small by exactly the amount of her allocation. His expression changed slightly. Approval, perhaps. Useful arithmetic. Only if someone reads it. Most arithmetic suffers from that problem. This time, Cecily did smile. The humor in his eyes deepened. Agnes saw it. Cecily knew because her aunt reached for the teapot, even though Martha had only just filled their cups. Sebastian asked about the parish accounts. Agnes answered twice. Both times he redirected the question to Cecily without discourtesy. By the third occasion, even Agnes could not pretend it was accidental. When the visit had lasted the proper interval, Sebastian rose. So, he said, drawing on one glove that he had removed while taking tea, I will not trespass further upon your mourning. Cecily stood. It was no trespass, Your Grace. He reached toward the small table where Martha had placed his calling card. Cecily, thinking he meant her to keep it, reached at the same moment. Their fingertips touched. It lasted no more than a second. Her hand stilled, so did his. She had removed her gloves after breakfast, and the contact of skin against skin felt startlingly direct after half an hour of careful conversation. Sebastian's gaze met hers. Nothing in his expression became improper, but the humor vanished. For that one moment, he looked entirely serious. Cecily withdrew her hand first. "Forgive me." "There is nothing to forgive." His voice was quieter. He picked up the card, then held it out to her instead. "This is yours." She accepted it. "Thank you." Agnes's attention sharpened visibly. Sebastian took up his hat. Then, before turning away, he addressed Cecily once more. "May I call again?" Agnes drew breath. Cecily answered before she could speak. "Yes, Your Grace." Something eased in his face. "Then I shall." He bowed first to Cecily, then to Agnes, and departed. The front door closed. For several heartbeats, Cecily remained standing with the calling card in her hand. Sebastian Vale, Duke of Alderwick. The name was engraved simply, without ornament. Agnes extended her hand. "Give me that." Cecily looked up. "Why?" "It belongs on the card tray." Cecily hesitated, then placed it in her aunt's palm. There was nothing unusual in the request, nothing she could reasonably object to. That evening, Cecily went upstairs before Agnes. After the house quieted, Agnes entered the front hall alone. Martha was extinguishing one of the lamps. "Mrs. Bell." The housekeeper turned. "Ma'am." Agnes removed Sebastian's card from the silver tray. She crossed to the small writing table beneath the stair, took up a pencil, and wrote on the reverse in a firm hand. "Miss Fairbourne is not to receive further callers without my permission." She handed the card to Martha. "Dispose of it." Martha looked down at the words. "Yes, ma'am." Agnes went upstairs. Martha remained in the hall until she heard the bedchamber door close above. Then she folded neither the card nor the instruction. She slipped it intact into the pocket of her apron. 2 days later, at Alderwick Park, Sebastian opened a brief message delivered from Fairbourne House. He read it once, then again. "Miss Fairbourne does not wish to receive His Grace again." Sebastian laid the paper flat upon his desk. Cecily's voice returned to him with perfect clarity. "Yes, Your Grace." He looked toward the bell pull. Then he smiled without amusement. "No," he said softly. She said the opposite. Sebastian found Cecily 2 days later in the rectory garden with a basket of folded linen on one arm, and Mrs. Pembroke arguing cheerfully with the gardener over the fate of a rosemary hedge. He had come on parish business, at least. That was what he told himself as he handed his reins to the groom waiting near the rectory gate. Mrs. Pembroke spotted him first. "Your Grace, you have arrived in time to save Mr. Hail from me." The gardener removed his hat. "I would not presume to ask His Grace to interfere, ma'am." "A wise man," Sebastian said. Cecily looked up. For one brief moment, surprise softened her face. Then she curtsied. "Your Grace, Miss Fairbourne." Mrs. Pembroke, apparently satisfied that the rosemary could survive without judicial intervention, turned toward the house. "I must find my husband. He has misplaced a list of subscription pledges, which usually means he has put it inside a sermon." She relieved Cecily of the linen basket. "I shall take these." Cecily glanced at her. "I can bring them." "Nonsense." "His Grace has come about Widow Hart's cottage, I expect." Sebastian had, in fact, instructed his steward to speak with the rector. He accepted the excuse Mrs. Pembroke had created for them. "The drainage work begins tomorrow." Cecily's expression brightened. "That is good news." They walked slowly along the gravel path, still plainly visible from the rectory windows. The lower ditch was nearly blocked, Sebastian said. "Another winter would have put water into the cottage. I thought the garden looked too wet for the amount of rain we have had. I am beginning to suspect you notice inconvenient things. Only inconvenient to people who prefer not to look." He glanced at her. "That sounds dangerously like a principle. I try not to collect too many. They require maintenance." Sebastian laughed. It was the first time Cecily had heard the sound from him without the protection of formality around it. She smiled before caution could stop her. The moment was small, but something altered. He was not merely the Duke of Alderwick now. He was a man who could be amused. Sebastian seemed to notice the same change because his next words came without their earlier lightness. I received a message from Fairbourne House. Cecily's smile faded. What message? That you did not wish me to call again. She stopped walking. Sebastian stopped with her. For a second, Cecily said nothing. Then, very clearly, I sent no such message. I did not think you had. Her eyes lifted to his. You did not? You told me I might call again. People sometimes change their minds. They do. He paused. But usually I prefer to hear of it from the person whose mind has changed. Cecily looked toward the rectory. The linen basket had disappeared inside. Mrs. Pembroke was nowhere in sight. Who delivered the message? One of my servants received it from a boy sent from Fairbourne House. Did it carry my signature? No. Then it was not mine. There was no tremor in her voice. Sebastian respected that almost as much as the answer itself. I could speak to your aunt. No. The refusal came quickly. He raised an eyebrow. Cecily drew a breath. Forgive me. That sounded abrupt. I have survived worse. A reluctant curve touched her mouth. That is not what I meant. I know. She looked down the garden path. If someone is answering in my name, I would prefer to understand how often it has happened before another person speaks for me. Sebastian considered her. That is reasonable. You sound surprised. I am accustomed to people asking me to solve problems before I fully understand them. And do you? Far too often. There was enough self-knowledge in the answer to disarm her. Cecily resumed walking. So you will not confront Aunt Agnes, not unless you ask me to. She looked at him again. Thank you. I am not certain I deserve gratitude for doing exactly what you requested. That may be why I offered it. He smiled. The garden gate opened before either could say more. Mrs. Pembroke emerged with another woman beside her. The newcomer was perhaps 60, elegantly dressed in deep plum silk beneath a traveling pelisse, with silver threaded through dark hair and the confident posture of someone long accustomed to entering rooms without wondering whether she belonged there. Your Grace, Mrs. Pembroke called. You know Lady Dorothea Mercer, of course. Sebastian bowed. Your Grace. Her gaze shifted to Cecily, then stopped. Cecily Fairbourne? Cecily stared. My lady? Lady Dorothea came nearer. My dear girl, I would scarcely have known you. It has been years. Cecily searched her memory. Lady Dorothea supplied the answer. I knew your mother. Something tightened softly in Cecily's chest. Yes, I remember you came to Fairbourne House once after she died, and wrote to you later. Cecily hesitated. Lady Dorothea frowned. Did you not receive my invitation? What invitation? The older woman's expression changed. I asked you to spend a fortnight with me at Mercer Dower House. It must be 4 years ago now. Cecily felt Sebastian become very still beside her. I never saw such a letter. Lady Dorothea looked genuinely troubled. I received a reply. From me? So I believed. What did it say? That you were grateful, but preferred not to leave your aunt and had no wish to increase your acquaintance. Cecily went pale, though her voice remained steady. I did not write that, Mrs. Pembroke's face tightened with concern. Lady Dorothea stared at her. I am certain the reply came from Fairbourne House. Sebastian said nothing. Cecily was suddenly grateful for that. One contradiction could have been a misunderstanding. Two were harder to dismiss. She thought of Agnes answering questions during Sebastian's visit. Agnes taking the calling card from her hand. Agnes deciding who required gratitude, who required silence, who was useful, who was foolish. For years, Cecily had believed the emptiness around her was evidence. Perhaps it had been only an arrangement. Lady Dorothea reached toward her, then paused rather than assuming the liberty. My dear, I am sorry. Cecily shook her head. You have nothing to apologize for. I believed I had been refused, and I believed I had not been asked. The words settled heavily between them. Sebastian watched Cecily's face. What would you like to do? She turned toward him. Not what shall I do for you? Not leave this to me. The question itself steadied her. I would like facts. Lady Dorothea nodded at once. I still have many old letters. I keep more paper than my steward considers sensible. Sebastian's mouth twitched. At last, a vice with practical value. Lady Dorothea gave him a look. You are impertinent for a duke. I find the title encourages bad habits. Cecily laughed. She did not mean to. The sound escaped before she could stop it. Sebastian looked at her, and for a moment, the confusion in the garden did not vanish, but it became easier to bear. Lady Dorothea noticed. So did Mrs. Pembroke. Neither remarked upon it. Cecily gathered herself. If you still possess the reply, my lady, may I see it? Of course. And until then, I would prefer no accusation be made. Sebastian inclined his head. As you wish. Cecily met his gaze. I would rather learn what has been said in my name before anyone speaks in it again. His expression lost its humour. You have my word. Across the low hedge bordering the rectory garden, a carriage had drawn up on the lane. Inside it, Agnes Fairbourne sat very straight. She had arrived to collect Cecily, and through the open side of the carriage, she could see her niece standing in the autumn sunlight between Lady Dorothea Mercer and the Duke of Alderwick. Then Cecily laughed at something. The Duke said. Agnes's gloved hand tightened around the handle of her parasol. Agnes said very little on the carriage ride home from the rectory. That was how Cecily knew the silence mattered. Usually, her aunt corrected the angle of a bonnet, the length of a visit, the amount of warmth shown in conversation. This afternoon, there was only the creak of leather, the muted roll of wheels over the Hampshire road, and the occasional sharp tap of Agnes's parasol against the carriage floor. Cecily did not fill the quiet for her. Lady Dorothea's words remained far more important. I received a reply. By the time Fairbourne House came into view, Cecily had made one decision. She would not accuse Agnes without proof. She would also never again assume that silence meant no one had spoken. 2 days later, Sebastian Vale called again. This time, Agnes was ready for him. Mrs. Ellison, a widowed neighbour of respectable age and inexhaustible conversation, had been invited to take tea. Cecily understood the purpose at once. No one would later suggest that the Duke of Alderwick had been permitted an improper degree of privacy with Agnes Fairbourne's niece. Sebastian appeared to understand it as well. He bowed to Mrs. Ellison with such grave courtesy that she immediately began telling him about her nephew's prospects in the militia. Sebastian listened for nearly 3 minutes. Then he said, I had no idea the defence of the kingdom depended so heavily upon whether Mr. Ellison receives a better tailor. Mrs. Ellison stared at him. Cecily lowered her teacup. Sebastian's expression remained perfectly solemn. Then Mrs. Ellison laughed. Even Agnes allowed herself a thin smile. The conversation moved safely through parish subscriptions, the repair of the North Road, and an argument between 2 tenants concerning a shared boundary hedge. Cecily had intended to remain mostly silent. Sebastian made that difficult. What would you do, Miss Fairbourne? Agnes looked up. The question concerned the boundary dispute. Cecily set down her cup. If both men are certain the hedge belongs to the other, I would begin by asking who has been cutting it. Mrs. Ellison blinked. Sebastian's mouth curved. Practical. Ownership becomes clearer when labour is involved. And if they have both been cutting it, then they have managed cooperation without admitting it. Sebastian laughed. Agnes shifted in her chair. Mrs. Ellison, now entertained, leaned forward. You have opinions on estate management, Miss Fairbourne. I have opinions on people. That is much more dangerous, Sebastian said. Cecily glanced at him. Only to people who insist on behaving predictably. Something warm passed through his expression. It was not the careful attention he had given her in the vestry, nor the deliberate courtesy of his first call. It felt easier than either. The discussion moved from the boundary hedge to a lending library. Mrs. Pembroke hoped to establish near the church. Agnes dismissed the proposal as an unnecessary expense. Labourers have little time for books. Then perhaps the books should be worth the time they do have. Cecily said. Sebastian looked toward her. What would you put on the shelves? Practical volumes first. Husbandry, household medicine, simple arithmetic, some sermons, because Mr. Pembroke would insist, and novels. Agnes sighed. For labourers? Yes. For anyone capable of being tired. Mrs. Ellison smiled into her tea. Sebastian studied Cecily. Dangerous again. Your Grace seems disappointed whenever I am not. On the contrary, I am beginning to rely upon it. Agnes's spoon touched her saucer too sharply. A moment later, Mrs. Ellison asked to see the embroidery frame in the adjoining sitting room. Agnes rose with her, clearly intending Cecily to follow. Sebastian was examining a volume left on the side table. He turned it over. A translation of Plutarch. It belonged to my father, Cecily said. Agnes paused in the doorway. Cecily, I am coming. Mrs. Ellison had already moved into the next room. Agnes remained where she was, close enough for propriety, far enough that conversation could continue. Sebastian glanced at the book again. Do you like it? Parts of it. A diplomatic answer. I dislike being told that a man is admirable merely because he has been dead for 2,000 years. He looked at her. That may be the least diplomatic thing you have said to me. I can try harder. I hope you do not. The lightness faded slowly. Sebastian placed the book back on the table. Most people try very hard with me. Cecily heard the change in his voice. With you. With the title. He looked toward the open doorway where Agnes and Mrs. Ellison could still be heard discussing needlework. Some people fear it. Some people flatter it. Some people calculate what it may be persuaded to do for them before I have removed my gloves. Cecily smiled faintly. That sounds exhausting. It is occasionally useful. I imagine so, and occasionally very dull. There was no self-pity in the admission. That made it more intimate. Cecily looked at him more carefully. He had seemed entirely at ease since entering the room, amused, composed, impossible to embarrass. Now she wondered how much of that ease was chosen. Sebastian noticed her scrutiny. What? Nothing. That is rarely true when someone looks at me that way. She hesitated, then said, I think you use humor to leave first. His expression stilled. Leave? Before anyone can say something that matters. For once, Sebastian Vale had no clever answer ready. Cecily felt immediately that she had stepped too close to something private. I beg your pardon. No. He spoke quietly. You are not wrong. The silence between them changed. Agnes's voice continued from the next room, but it seemed suddenly distant. Sebastian looked down at his gloves. When people expect something from the Duke of Alderwick, Sebastian Vale becomes convenient to misplace. Cecily understood the sentence more deeply than he could know. She said, Then I think I should prefer Sebastian Vale. His eyes lifted to hers. No smile, no teasing reply, only stillness. Cecily's pulse gave one hard, unexpected beat. From the adjoining room came the scrape of Mrs. Ellison's chair. Cecily rose. Sebastian moved at once and offered his hand. It was a perfectly proper gesture. Nothing more was required of it. Cecily could have rested her fingertips against his glove for barely a moment and let go. Instead, she placed her hand fully in his. Deliberately, his fingers closed around hers with restrained care. The contact lasted only long enough to help her rise. Yet neither of them treated it as accidental. Cecily withdrew first. Thank you. My pleasure. His voice was steady again, but softer. Across the doorway, Agnes stood motionless. Mrs. Ellison had gone ahead toward the hall. Agnes's gaze moved from Cecily to Sebastian, then briefly to their separated hands. Something settled in her face. Not surprise. Decision. Sebastian departed a few minutes later after the proper farewells. Cecily watched from the drawing-room window as the Alderwick carriage turned down the drive. Behind her, Agnes said nothing. That evening, after Cecily had gone upstairs, Agnes entered the small writing room. She took out a sheet of cream paper and sharpened the nib of her pen. For several moments she sat without writing. Then she began. My dear Mrs. Lethbridge, I believe I may have found precisely the suitable companion we discussed. By the following Sunday, Agnes had become kind. That was what unsettled Cecily most. At breakfast, she complimented the trimming on Cecily's bonnet. After church, she asked whether Cecily had found the sermon too long. By the time they returned to Fairbourne House for the small luncheon Agnes had arranged, she had spoken to her niece with such measured sweetness that Cecily began to suspect every word. The guests were few. Mrs. Pembroke had come from the rectory with her husband. Mrs. Ellison sat near the fire. Sir Edmund and Lady Fallow, whose estate lay several miles west of Belmere, completed the local company. Sebastian arrived last. Cecily had known he was expected, only because she had seen the Alderwick carriage from the morning-room window. He entered with his usual composure, greeted Agnes, bowed to the company, and then looked at Cecily. "Miss Fairbourne, Your Grace." Nothing improper passed between them, yet she remembered his hand beneath hers 2 days earlier. She remembered, too, the way he had looked at her when she said she would prefer Sebastian Vale. That memory was enough to make her pulse less obedient than she wished. The luncheon began pleasantly. Too pleasantly. Agnes discussed parish repairs and Lady Fallow's plans for a winter subscription. Sebastian contributed occasional remarks dry enough to amuse Mrs. Ellison without giving Agnes cause for offence. Cecily waited. She knew her aunt. Agnes had never mistaken silence for surrender. She regarded it as the interval before another attempt. The attempt came after the second course had been removed. Agnes folded her napkin. "I am relieved to tell you all," she said, "that Cecily's future is finally settled." Cecily looked at her. Across the table, Sebastian's attention sharpened. Mrs. Pembroke smiled cautiously. "Settled? Yes, I have been quite anxious about her." "Aunt Agnes," Cecily said. Agnes continued as though she had not spoken. "A distant connection of ours, Mrs. Lethbridge, is in need of a companion. A very respectable position. Quiet household, excellent references." The room changed, not loudly. A fork was set down. Mrs. Ellison's eyes moved towards Cecily. Cecily felt the blood leave her face. Agnes smiled at her. "Mrs. Lethbridge lives near Shrewsbury. It will be a change of scene, which I believe Cecily needs." Lady Fallow said, "How soon is she to go?" "The arrangements are already under discussion." Cecily's hands remained still in her lap. She had learned long ago that humiliation became worse when one gave it visible panic to feed upon. "What arrangements?" Agnes finally looked directly at her. "My dear, there is no need to trouble yourself with details." "What arrangements?" A faint line appeared between Agnes's brows. "Mrs. Lethbridge and I have corresponded. About me, about your future. I was not aware my future had entered the post." Mrs. Ellison lowered her eyes. Sir Edmund became intensely interested in his wine. Agnes's smile thinned. "You are 31, Cecily. You cannot remain indefinitely in a household that is not your own." Cecily heard the cruelty because she had heard its earlier versions too many times, but this one was different. This one had paperwork behind it, action. Agnes had moved from telling Cecily what no one wanted to deciding what Cecily must accept instead. Mrs. Pembroke spoke gently. "Has Miss Fairbourne agreed to the position?" Agnes gave a small laugh. "She is naturally hesitant. Cecily has always been reluctant to admit what is practical." "I have never been asked." The words were quiet. Everyone heard them. Agnes's expression hardened. "Do not be childish." Cecily looked at her. "What did you tell Mrs. Lethbridge?" "That you were suitable." "What did you tell her I wanted?" Agnes paused. Sebastian said nothing. Cecily noticed that. He could have ended the scene with one sentence. A duke's displeasure would have been enough to make Agnes retreat, or at least soften her language. He did not do it. He let the silence belong to Cecily. Agnes said, "I told her you would be grateful for a respectable occupation." Cecily felt something inside her become unexpectedly calm. Then the correspondence began without the only answer that mattered. A flush climbed Agnes's throat. This is hardly the place. You chose the place, Cecily. You announced it before guests. Agnes glanced around the table, suddenly conscious of the witnesses she herself had assembled. Do not make a scene. Cecily held her gaze. You have arranged nothing that requires my consent. The silence that followed was absolute. Not the silence of scandal. The silence of a room in which everyone understood that something important had just been said plainly. Agnes pushed back her chair. I have cared for you since your father died, and I have been grateful for a home. Grateful women do not humiliate the people who support them. Cecily's voice remained steady. Nor do grateful women surrender the right to answer for themselves. Agnes turned toward Sebastian. Perhaps she expected rank to restore order. Your Grace, surely you understand my position. A woman in Cecily's circumstances must consider security. Sebastian set down his glass. I understand that security chosen freely may be a comfort. Agnes waited. He added, security chosen by someone else has another name. Cecily looked at him. He did not look triumphant. He did not even look particularly severe. He simply turned to her. What do you wish to do, Miss Fairbourne? Her chest tightened. Not what should be done with you. Not will you permit me to intervene. What do you wish? Cecily drew a breath. I will consider my own living arrangements. Agnes stared at her. You have nowhere to go. Cecily thought of Lady Dorothea in the rectory garden. I asked you to spend a fortnight with me. Perhaps there had been doors she had never known existed. I will determine that for myself. The luncheon did not recover. It ended 20 minutes later under a brittle shell of politeness. Sebastian made no attempt to detain Cecily or speak to her privately. Before leaving, he bowed and said only, Good afternoon, Miss Fairbourne. There was respect in the restraint. Cecily understood it. That evening, she went not to Agnes's writing desk but to her own. She took out a clean sheet of paper. Her first line required 3 attempts. My dear Lady Dorothea. Then she stopped. Too formal. She began again. My lady, you once offered me a place in your home, and I never had the chance to answer for myself. This time, Cecily did not ask Agnes to send the letter. She carried it personally to Mrs. Pembroke at the rectory the following morning. Lady Dorothea's reply came the next afternoon. Cecily broke the seal alone. There were only 3 lines. My dear Cecily, no invitation of mine requires gratitude, and no door of mine requires permission from your aunt. Come whenever you choose, Dorothea. Cecily packed the next morning. Not much was required. Her clothes occupied 1 trunk and a smaller valise. Her books filled a wooden travelling case that had belonged to her father. The tortoise-shell spectacles case went into her reticule rather than the trunk. Some possessions, she had decided, should remain within reach. Agnes found her folding a grey walking dress. You are serious? Cecily did not look up. Yes. You intend to leave this house because I tried to secure you a respectable future. I intend to leave because you tried to secure it without asking me. Agnes stood in the bedchamber doorway. You will regret this display. Cecily folded the dress carefully. I hope not. Lady Dorothea will tire of you. Perhaps. The answer seemed to anger Agnes more than denial would have. You think because a countess has written 3 sentimental lines and a duke has taken a temporary interest in you, the world has changed. No. Cecily closed the trunk lid. I think I have changed. Agnes stared at her. There had been a time when that look alone could make Cecily apologize for a thought she had not spoken. Not today. Agnes crossed farther into the room. You have no fortune worth mentioning. I have my mother's annuity. A modest one. Yes, quarterly payments sufficient for gowns, pins, and perhaps a hired room, if you are very economical. Hardly independence. Cecily turned toward her. It is enough to ensure that gratitude need not become obedience. Agnes's face hardened. For years, Cecily had allowed the annuity to disappear into the ordinary arithmetic of her life at Fairbourne House. Agnes provided the roof. Cecily contributed in quieter ways. She kept accounts, corresponded with tradesmen, supervised linen, organized parish lists, and made herself useful wherever usefulness prevented questions about belonging. The arrangement had never been legal dependence. It had simply begun to feel like one. Agnes said, "You will come back." Cecily said nothing. When society loses interest, when Lady Dorothea has other amusements, when His Grace remembers the difference between curiosity and attachment. Cecily's hands paused on the trunk straps. The last remark struck where Agnes intended. She felt it. She refused to pretend otherwise. Sebastian's attention mattered to her now. That was precisely why she would not build her freedom upon it. "If I come back," Cecily said, "it will be because I choose to visit." Agnes's expression shifted. Cecily fastened the final strap. "I will not return to live here." A soft knock sounded at the open door. Martha Bell stood outside. "Miss Fairbourne?" "Yes, Martha." The housekeeper glanced at Agnes. "I wondered if I might speak with you." Agnes drew herself up. "Anything you have to say may be said in front of me." Martha's hands tightened around her apron. Then, with an unexpected steadiness, she said, "I don't believe it may, Mum." Agnes went very still. Cecily had never heard Martha contradict her. "Mrs. Bell?" Martha reached into the pocket of her apron. "I should have given this to Miss Fairbourne sooner." She held out a calling card. Cecily recognized it immediately. Sebastian Vale, Duke of Alderwick. The card from his first visit. She took it. "I thought Aunt Agnes put this on the tray." "She did." Martha swallowed. Then she took it off. Agnes's voice cut across the room. "That is household business." Cecily turned the card over. There, in Agnes's unmistakable hand, were the words, "Miss Fairbourne is not to receive further callers without my permission." For several seconds, Cecily simply stared. Not an assumption. Not a misunderstanding, an instruction, a decision made in writing. She lifted her eyes. "You wrote this." Agnes did not deny it. "You needed protecting from foolish expectations. By preventing people from calling, by preventing one man from encouraging an attachment that could only humiliate you." Martha said quietly, "You told me to throw it away." Agnes rounded on her. "And you disobeyed me." "Yes, Ma'am." Cecily looked at Martha. "Thank you." The housekeeper's eyes filled, though she blinked quickly. "I am sorry I kept it." "You kept the truth." Cecily slipped the card into her reticule beside the tortoise shell case. Agnes laughed once, without humor. "One card. You imagine that proves some great conspiracy?" "No." Cecily's voice remained calm. "It proves one choice you made for me." She met Agnes's gaze, "And Lady Dorothea can prove another." A letter had arrived that morning, confirming that the old refusal she had received 4 years earlier was still among her papers. That was enough. Cecily did not need a trunk full of secret correspondence. She needed only facts. By noon, Lady Dorothea's carriage stood before Fairbourne House. Cecily's luggage had been carried downstairs when Martha came to find her again. "His Grace is in the drawing room." Cecily stopped. "His Grace? He says he was sent for." Cecily remembered the note she had dispatched earlier through Mrs. Pembroke. Yes, she had asked him to come. Not to save her, to say goodbye properly. Sebastian stood when she entered. His gaze moved over her travelling dress, then toward the hall where her trunk waited. "So it is decided. It is Lady Dorothea?" "Yes." He nodded. "I am glad." Something in Cecily loosened. No argument. No offer to have her removed to Alderwick Park. No assumption that his resources must become her solution. "I thought you might try to persuade me otherwise." "I considered it." She raised an eyebrow. He gave her the faintest smile. "Then I remembered that I enjoy remaining welcome." She almost laughed. Sebastian became more serious. "My carriage is at your disposal if you require it." "Lady Dorothea has already sent hers." "Of course she has." There was no offense in his tone, only acceptance. Cecily looked at him. "I have something to show you." She took his calling card from her reticule and handed it to him. He read Agnes's instruction. The humor disappeared from his face. She wrote this after my first call. Yes. And Mrs. Bell preserved it. Yes. Sebastian turned the card over once more. I could deal with this. I know. His eyes lifted to hers. Cecily continued. I do not want it dealt with by rank before I have decided what should be said and to whom. He held her gaze for a moment. Then he gave the card back. Very well. No wounded pride. No insistence. Cecily placed it safely away. Sebastian said, May I call upon you at Lady Dorothea's? The question affected her more than she expected. She looked toward the window. Lady Dorothea's carriage waited beyond the glass. She was leaving. She had money enough to live modestly. A home had been offered without conditions. For the first time in years, Sebastian's presence was not the only alternative to Agnes. Cecily turned back to him. Will you still wish to? His brow furrowed slightly. When I am no longer here. Understanding came slowly into his face. When I am no longer someone who requires rescuing. Sebastian was silent. Then he said, I hope to discover precisely that. It was such an honest answer that Cecily could not look away. He did not declare devotion. He did not promise permanence before either of them had earned it. He simply left room for truth. Cecily stepped closer. Sebastian did not move. She reached for his hand. This time she was the one who offered. His fingers closed around hers, warm, steady. They remained joined. Cecily felt no need to release him immediately. Then come because you wish to know me, she said, not because I need you. Sebastian's thumb shifted lightly against her hand. I can do that. From the hall came the distant sound of a trunk being secured to the carriage. Cecily held his hand for one moment longer. Then she let go. When she walked out of Fairbourne House, Agnes did not come to the door. Martha did. Cecily embraced the housekeeper briefly, climbed into Lady Dorothea's carriage, and settled against the seat. Sebastian stood several paces back beneath the portico. He did not follow. He did not command the driver. He only watched as the carriage began to move. Cecily looked ahead. When Fairbourne House disappeared beyond the bend in the road, she did not turn back. 5 days after leaving Fairbourne House, Cecily stood beside Lady Dorothea Mercer in a sunlit drawing room and heard the first carriage turn into the drive. She did not ask who it was. That mattered. At Fairbourne House, every arrival had once carried the weight of possibility. A carriage on the road might have meant nothing. Usually, Cecily had trained herself to expect exactly that. Here, she did not need to pretend indifference. Lady Dorothea glanced at her. Nervous? A little. Good. Entirely calm people are frequently either saints or liars. Cecily smiled. Lady Dorothea had arranged the Sunday receiving afternoon with deceptive simplicity. No grand assembly, no ballroom, no crowd assembled for spectacle. Only people who had some reason to know Cecily, or some reason to hear Agnes correct what she had said publicly the previous Sunday. The footman entered. Mrs. Pembroke, my lady. Mrs. Pembroke came in with warmth enough to make formality impossible. My dear Cecily. She took both of Cecily's hands. I am very glad to see you here. So am I, Mrs. Pembroke looked around approvingly. And standing up. Lady Dorothea raised an eyebrow. Was there another possibility? Not if I had anything to say about it. The next callers were Sir Edmund and Lady Fallow. Then Mrs. Ellison arrived, carrying enough conversation for 3 households. Widow Hart came later with her married daughter, both plainly dressed and slightly overwhelmed by Lady Dorothea's drawing room. Cecily crossed the room herself to greet them. Mrs. Hart, the widow, curtsied. Miss Fairbourne, I hope we are not too early. You are exactly when you chose to come. Mrs. Hart smiled uncertainly, then understood. The smile deepened. Cecily seated her near Mrs. Pembroke. By 3:30, the room contained no more than a dozen people. Yet Cecily felt the significance of every arrival. They had come, not because Sebastian commanded them, not because Lady Dorothea had announced a scandal, because invitations had been sent and people had chosen to accept. Another carriage sounded, This time, Cecily knew the crest before the footman announced him. His Grace, the Duke of Alderwick, Sebastian entered. He bowed to Lady Dorothea first, then to Cecily. "Miss Fairbourne, Your Grace." His gaze rested on her for one restrained second. She had not seen him since leaving Fairbourne House. He looked exactly as he had then, and somehow not at all. There was no crisis requiring his intervention now. No luggage waiting, no aunt blocking a door. He had simply come because he had been invited. Cecily felt something quiet and warm settle beneath her ribs. Sebastian took his place among the other callers. He did not position himself beside Cecily as though claiming her. He spoke to Mr. Pembroke about the parish road, listened to Mrs. Hart describe the repairs to her cottage, and endured Mrs. Ellison's account of her nephew's tailor with admirable composure. Cecily caught his eye once. He gave her the faintest look of suffering. She almost laughed. Then the final carriage arrived. Agnes Fairbourne entered alone. The room changed. Lady Dorothea rose. "Mrs. Fairbourne." "My lady." Agnes's gaze found Cecily immediately. There was no tenderness in it, only control under strain. "I came because you insisted." "I requested," Lady Dorothea said. "You were free to decline." The distinction was not lost on Cecily. Agnes removed her gloves finger by finger. "I do not see what purpose this serves." Cecily answered before Lady Dorothea could. "It allows me to correct what was said about me in company." Agnes turned. "You have already made your decision." "Yes. Then why continue this? Because leaving your house did not make your statements true." Silence spread through the room. Cecily had not invited humiliation. She would not create one now. Her voice remained even. "At your luncheon, you announced that I had agreed to become Mrs. Lethbridge's companion." Agnes's jaw tightened. "I said arrangements were underway. Without my consent. You needed a secure position. I needed to be asked." Agnes looked toward the company. "I acted because she had no prospects." Cecily reached into the small reticule beside her chair. She removed Sebastian's calling card. The card had remained intact. No folds, no tears, only Agnes's writing on the reverse. Cecily held it toward Lady Dorothea. "My aunt removed this after His Grace's first call." Lady Dorothea read the instruction aloud, without theatrical emphasis. "Miss Fairbourne is not to receive further callers without my permission." A small shift passed through the room. Agnes lifted her chin. "One card proves only prudence." Lady Dorothea handed it back to Cecily. "Then perhaps my letter proves habit." She crossed to the writing table and lifted a folded sheet. 4 years ago, I invited Cecily to stay with me. I received a refusal from Fairbourne House stating that she preferred not to increase her acquaintance. Agnes said nothing. Cecily turned to her. "I never saw that invitation. You were unsettled after your father's death. That was not your answer to give." Agnes's composure cracked slightly. "I knew what was best for you." Mrs. Pembroke spoke from near the window. "Did Miss Fairbourne ever ask you to refuse callers?" Agnes did not answer. Lady Dorothea produced one final paper. "Mrs. Bell sent this yesterday." Cecily knew of the statement, but had not seen it. Lady Dorothea summarized rather than reading every line. "Martha Bell confirms that Mrs. Fairbourne ordered the Duke's card removed and instructed her to dispose of it." No one gasped. No one needed to. The facts were plain. Agnes looked at Cecily. "You want them to think me cruel." "No." Cecily stood. "I want them to stop thinking you were speaking for me because I had nothing to say." Agnes's face hardened. "You would have left." The words came too quickly. The room stilled. Agnes seemed to hear herself only after they were spoken. Cecily waited. Agnes looked away. "If you had known Lady Dorothea still wanted your company, if people had encouraged you, if His Grace had continued calling," her voice grew quieter, "you would have left. There it was, not protection, not prudence, fear." Cecily felt no triumph, only clarity. Then, perhaps no one came because you were always answering the door. Agnes closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, The fight had gone out of her posture. Lady Dorothea said, "You will correct the matter of Mrs. Lethbridge." Agnes gave one stiff nod. "I will write today, and you will not represent Miss Fairbourne's wishes again." Cecily answered, "She will not have the opportunity." Agnes looked at her. Cecily continued, "I will not return to Fairbourne House to live." The consequence was not banishment. It was loss of authority. Mrs. Ellison, who possessed many faults but little tolerance for cowardice, said quietly, "Then society will address Miss Fairbourne directly." Lady Fallow nodded. So it should. Agnes replaced her gloves. No one applauded. No one mocked her. That somehow made the judgment sharper. She left within minutes. When the last callers had gone and Lady Dorothea tactfully disappeared to inspect something entirely unnecessary in the library, Cecily remained near the window. Sebastian stood several feet away. "You were very quiet," she said. "I was instructed not to speak for you." She turned toward him. "I did not instruct you never to speak. That is reassuring. I had begun to fear a permanent sentence." She smiled. He came a little closer. "I discovered something inconvenient this week." "What?" "You are perfectly capable of arranging a life without me." Cecily watched him carefully. "And that troubles you?" "Yes." His honesty surprised her. Sebastian's expression lost its humor. "It also relieves me." She waited. "I wanted to know whether I came because you needed someone powerful on your side. And I missed arguing with you about parish books." Her mouth curved. "I missed the way you look at me when I make a joke you have decided not to encourage. That happens often. Cruelly often." Then he became serious again. "The frightening part is that you can refuse me now." Cecily's breath caught. "And yet you came." "Yes. Why?" Sebastian looked directly at her. "Because I wanted to see you. Nothing more. No promise he had not earned. No declaration before its time." Cecily crossed the remaining distance. He did not reach for her first. She did. Her arms went around him. For one heartbeat, Sebastian remained perfectly still, as though giving her time to change her mind. Then he held her. Carefully at first. Then, with unmistakable relief, Cecily rested her cheek against his coat and closed her eyes. The room was quiet. No audience. No rescue. Only choice. When she finally drew back, Sebastian's hands released her immediately. His voice was softer than she had ever heard it. "May I call again?" Cecily smiled. "I believe that question has already caused enough trouble." His answering smile came slowly. "Then I shall risk it. Come." This time, there was no one left who could answer for her. Over the next 4 weeks, Sebastian came often enough to make his presence familiar, and seldom enough to keep every visit deliberate. Cecily noticed the difference. At Fairbourne House, attention had always carried consequence. A kindness might be counted. A favor might become a debt. A silence might conceal an arrangement made without her. With Sebastian, the hours became simpler. One afternoon, they spent nearly half an hour disagreeing over a proposal for a small estate school near Alderwick Park. You cannot teach children arithmetic only when it benefits an estate ledger, Cecily told him. I had planned to teach them arithmetic because numbers are useful. To whom? He leaned back in Lady Dorothea's drawing-room chair. This is becoming an interrogation. You are a duke. Surely you are accustomed to answering difficult questions. No, I am accustomed to people deciding my answers are excellent before I have given them. Cecily smiled. Then, this must be refreshing. Brutally, they argued until Lady Dorothea entered, and informed them that if they intended to reform education in Hampshire, they might at least do it after tea. Another day, rain fell steadily from morning until dusk. Cecily expected no visitors. At 3, Sebastian arrived anyway, damp at the shoulders despite his greatcoat, and carrying absolutely nothing. No estate papers, no parish report, no urgent problem. Cecily looked at his empty hands. What have you forgotten? My purpose, apparently. You have come without one? I came to see you. She studied him. That is all. I am attempting simplicity. It does not suit you. I feared as much, but he stayed. They read near the fire. They spoke of books, Mrs. Ellison's nephew, the ridiculous number of geese, occupying one of Lady Dorothea's lower fields, and nothing of consequence at all. It was that visit, more than any declaration could have done, that answered Cecily's question. He had not come because she was trapped. He had not come because Agnes was cruel. He had not come because truth required a witness. He came because he wanted her company. That realization followed her into the final mild days of autumn. Several afternoons later, Cecily walked with Sebastian through Lady Dorothea's garden. The air was cool enough for gloves, though the last roses still held stubbornly to the wall. Sebastian had been unusually quiet. Cecily glanced at him. You have not made a single improper observation for at least 10 minutes. I am preparing one. That sounds ominous. It is. He stopped beside a low stone bench. Cecily stopped too. His expression had none of its usual amusement. I have spent most of my life discovering that rank permits a man to enter almost any room. She waited. Doors open. People stand. Introductions appear. Opinions soften before I ask them to. That sounds very inconvenient. His mouth almost curved. Do not rescue me with humor. I am attempting sincerity. Forgive me. I do not. Now she smiled. Then he reached for neither her hand nor the advantage of the moment. He simply looked at her. You taught me that entering a person's life is different. The lightness left her. Sebastian continued. When I first called at Fairbourne House, I believed the important thing was that I had come when someone else told you. No one would. Cecily's throat tightened. But that was never enough. No, I know. He drew a slow breath. What matters is that you left without me. You found your own place. You corrected your own name. You proved you could build a life in which I was unnecessary. Cecily held his gaze. And yet you kept coming. Yes, why? This time he did not hide behind wit. I love you, Cecily. The words were quiet, certain nothing in them demanded repayment. Cecily felt the answer rise before fear could interfere. She took off one glove. Then she reached for his hand. Sebastian looked down as her fingers closed around his. She stepped closer. And I love you, Sebastian. For one rare moment, the Duke of Alderwick looked entirely robbed of speech. Cecily laughed softly. I believe I have finally discovered how to silence you. Do not spread the method. I may have it printed. His thumb moved lightly across her fingers, then he asked, May I kiss you? The question warmed her more deeply than assumption ever could have. Yes. Sebastian bent toward her slowly enough that she could have moved away. She did not. Their first kiss was gentle, restrained, and brief. When he drew back, Cecily remained close. Then, before he could say anything clever and spoil it, she kissed him again. That startled a laugh from him. I see. You asked permission for the first one, and the second was mine. I stand corrected. You frequently do. He looked at her for another moment, happiness changing his face in a way Rank never had. Then his expression grew serious again. Cecily, yes, I would like to ask something more dangerous. You may. Will you marry me? She did not answer immediately. Sebastian did not fill the silence. That mattered too. Cecily thought of Fairbourne House, of the companion position she had never accepted, of Agnes answering questions before Cecily could open her mouth, of Lady Dorothea's letter, of leaving without looking back. Then she looked at the man before her. Marriage to him was no escape now. She had already escaped. Yes, she said. Sebastian's breath left him. Cecily smiled. Yes, Sebastian, I will. He raised her hand and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. No applause followed. No witnesses were needed. Months later, on a bright Sunday afternoon at Alderwick Park, the silver card tray in the front hall held 6 calling cards. 3 were addressed formally to Her Grace, the Duchess of Alderwick. 2 came from women Cecily knew through parish work. 1 belonged to Mrs. Ellison, who had apparently decided that becoming a duchess did not excuse Cecily from hearing the latest disaster involving her nephew's tailor. Cecily carried the tray's newest card into the morning room. Her mother's tortoiseshell spectacles case rested on the desk beside an open parish account book. She opened the case. Inside, beneath the spectacles, lay an older card. Sebastian Vale, Duke of Alderwick. Its edges were slightly worn now. Agnes's instruction remained on the reverse. Cecily had kept it not as evidence anymore, but as memory. The truth about Agnes had been settled. The false companion arrangement had been formally withdrawn. Agnes no longer spoke for Cecily in society, and Cecily answered her aunt's occasional letters only when she chose. Forgiveness had not been demanded. Distance had become its own peace. Cecily placed the old card back beneath the spectacles and closed the case. Sebastian appeared in the doorway. "Are you ready?" "For what?" "Our walk." "You say that as if it were compulsory. I am a duke. I am told we are very powerful." Cecily gave him a look. Sebastian extended his hand, not commanding, offering. She crossed the room and took it. Outside, the autumn light lay warm across Alderwick Park. There were letters waiting to be answered. People Cecily wished to visit. Work she had chosen for herself, and beside her, a man she had chosen too. Together, they walked on. Thank you for listening to the story all the way to the end. Please tell us which city you're watching from and what the story made you feel. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss new stories.